Okay. Well, I have a hopefully fun and pretty quick project, actually two projects to share with you today, but I'm only going to replicate one of them and show you some tips and tricks for the other. But today I am focusing on part of the amazing Flowering Fields suite. And the parts that I will be using include the Flowering Tulips bundle, which we'll see in just a minute, the Evening Evergreen window pane check ribbon, and the brushed brass butterflies, which I have to say slowly because that is a tongue twister. And I wanted to show you two different designs. The one on the right, there are several elements in this card, a really fun background that we're going to replicate using the Flowering Tulips dies. I'm sorry, stamps. So right here. And I've also used the tulip dies to make the 3D flowers. There are quite a few dies in the set. There are 17 actually. And I chose to put them into this container just so I could get at them a little bit easier. And we're going to use the ribbon and also the butterflies. But let me show you another version using some very similar products. And to do that, I just wanted to introduce you to the new Slimline envelopes that Stampin' Up! Has. And the size of these envelopes, just so you know, they are 3 7/8 in width. And then with the flap closed, the length is 8 7/8. So they come in 3 different colors: smoky slate, white, and soft succulent. And then on the inside, you will see that there is a design that is on the inside of each, and each has a slightly different color. They come in packages of 15, which means you get 5 of each color. So what I decided to do is I wanted to make a slimline card that included some of the elements from the card that I showed you a few minutes ago. And this one is, I think it's just fun. It's definitely different, a little bit of a shabby chic look in a way, because we've got a lot of layers going on, the same kind of basic design, which we will do. And in this case, you're going to see there's an absence of the 3D tulips, but I will talk about those a little bit as well. So the card that I'm going to replicate today is the one on the left, but you're going to find that everything we do on the left, you can easily do for the card on the right. And again, I'll talk about the tulips. The tulips are worth a few cards in and of themselves. And I think I'll probably do a separate video on those because there are so many ways to use them. But let's get going on this. And I think you're going to enjoy this card. It's pretty quick, but it has a lot of fun little twists in it. So I mentioned that the Slimline envelope, the one that is showing in the back, is 3 7/8 by 8 7/8. So obvious statement, when you make a card to fit inside the envelope, you need to make sure that it is a little bit narrower and a little bit shorter than the envelope itself. Otherwise, it's not going to work incredibly well to get in. So what I did is I just took a piece of 8.5 by 11, and I kind of figured out the size that I wanted my card to be. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the 8.5 inch down. And I'm going to end up with a card that is going to fold to be 3 3/4 in width, which means I need this to be 7.5, since that's twice the amount of 3 3/4. Well, I'm starting with 8.5, easy math. I'm going to take 1 inch off the 8.5 inch side. So I'm just going to put my paper in, and I am going to cut off 1 inch on the 8.5 inch side, which means that what I'm going to be left with, and I can just double check my measurement, is 7.5 inches long. So that's part of the card, but the other part is this is way too long to fit into this envelope. So I need to cut this off. I need to cut the 11-inch side off. And I'm going to make that to be, let's see, I'm going to take off 2 1/4 inches. Since I'm starting with an envelope that is 8 7/8 inches long, I'm going to cut this so that it's going to be 8 3/4. It's going to give me just enough room to move it into the envelope so it will stay. So if I want that to be 8 3/4 long, that means that I'm going to take off 2 1/4. And I'm putting this in so the length is 11 inches. I'm going to cut off 2 1/4. And that is going to get me to a piece of paper that is 7 1/2 inches wide and 8 3/4 inches long. And then the last thing I need to do to create my base is I need to put a score right in the middle. So on the 7 1/2 inch side, I am going to score that at 3 3/4. And when you are using this paper trimmer, triple, quadruple check that when you intend to score, you've got your cutting blade well out of the way. The scoring blade is the one that is the lighter gray. And I'm just going to score that right down the middle. So I'm scoring that at 3 3/4. And that is how I am going to create the base for my card. And I'm just going to go ahead and burnish that. And I'll show you that it is going to fit really nicely into the envelope. So I'm just burnishing that right down the middle. And then if I bring the envelope back, you will see that the width is just a little bit shy and the length is just a little bit shy. So that's a really perfect size to fit into this slimline envelope. So again, the card, when it's folded, is 3 3/4 by 8 3/4. And it's just going to fit really well into that envelope. Okay. Well, this card has a couple of layers that are added to give it some interest and depth. And the one that I'm going to start with is actually the focal point, the one with the stamping and with the tearing. There are a couple of steps in this, and it's just a fun one to start with. And I am going to be using some of the stamps that are in the Flowering Tulips stamp set. These are photopolymer. When you stamp with photopolymer stamps, you don't get a lot of give. These are really stiff and they're meant to be. So one thing that you might want to do is have a little bit of a cushion underneath. It's almost like creating a red rubber stamp where that red rubber has a little bit of a give, and it just helps you get a good impression. What I'm using here is the Stampin' Pierce mat, and I just put a piece of paper right over the top. And then I am going to start with a piece of white cardstock. This is just a piece of basic white. You can use any color that you would like. And you're going to see that I'm not going to end up with the full width because I am going to do some tearing. But this starts as a piece of basic white that is 3 1/2 inches wide, and it starts at 5 1/4 inches long. It's really a little bit random in terms of the size, except I do suggest that you do have a 3 1/2 inch wide piece, because that's going to fit really well on the front of your card and leave a border on either side. So everything that I'm going to add when I add the layers, I'm adding in the same width. The focal point the Soft Succulent and the Mossy Meadow pieces are all 3.5 inches wide, but they're going to vary in the length and they're going to vary in what we're going to do with them. But it just gives you a nice kind of framed finish. But I'm going to start with this, and I am going to literally take some of the stamps from the Flowering Tulips stamp set. And I'll be honest with you, this is a little bit out of my comfort zone because typically I use a Stamparatus. And for me to do some freehand stamping, it's different, but it's liberating. And this stamp set is incredibly forgiving and fun to use to create an image. I am going to do an image that will include 2 tulips. I'm not going to try to replicate this because I've actually chosen a couple of different stamps from the set for the flowers, but I'm just going to kind of start in on this. And I am using Mossy Meadow as the green. It's just a really nice, deep, earthy green. I've stamped up the stem, and I'm not going to overthink this. Just going to go ahead and put that down. I do have a scrap piece of paper because I am going to stamp so the image looks like it's coming off the bottom. What's nice about these images is I can turn that stem around and I can make it look like it's a completely different stem and it's angled at a completely different way. So there I have my stems. And then included in the set are some really cool leaves. So you've got these 2 leaves, and just like the stem, they can be turned upside down. So you can use them in different orientations and you can get different looks. And again, out of my comfort zone, but hey, that's what New Year's are all about, right? So I am not going to overthink this. I'm just going to bring that in and stamp that down. And I'm going to re-ink. I'm going to flip that around. So when I do this on the other side, it just looks a little different. Doesn't look like it's super repetitive. That's so pretty already. And then I'm going to bring in the little leaf. And again, not overthink. Don't overthink, just stamp, right? That should be a t-shirt. And that one, I purposely brought off the bottom just a little bit. I've turned that stamp over and I'm going to bring that in. Just going to stand up a little bit here so I can actually see better what I'm doing. And just bring that down. And there we have the beginning of our image. And I'm not even going to care about that little oops, because I'll be able to cover that up without a problem in a little while. And then I'm going to bring in another color for the actual flowers. And on the examples that I had, I don't know why I gravitated to it, but I did. And the color that I used is pumpkin pie. I thought it was just really, really pretty. Definitely, in my opinion, one that you can use for multiple seasons. It's fall-ish, spring-ish, but you can use it for many different things. So the flower stamps that come with this set are 2-step. Many of them are. And what that means is that you're going to have, in this case, I'm going to start with these 2 images. You're going to actually start with one image, and then you're going to come in and you're going to put in the other. Now, you can be a little choosing on which ones you do, but the way I look at it is on this image, you've got some darker places on that petal. If I look over here, that area is not as filled in. So I tend to do the ones that fill in the area first, and then I'm going to come back in with the ones that don't have quite as much. So I'm going to start with this one. And the trick in figuring out which stamp you're starting with is if you just look at the area on your stamp and you look at what is going to be stamped. So what I'm cueing my eye to is I'm trying to find that little part that is going to have the design in it. And I can see, let me stamp this. Let me show you. I'm going to stamp this on a piece of paper. So I can tell that that is this stamp, obviously now. So I know that that's the one that I'm going to use second. And then the other trick is to just make sure that you have everything lined up, that you know where you are going to actually be stamping your image, and to make sure that everything does line up. So again, what I do is I just look at it and say, okay, I want to stamp that so I have it oriented in the same way as it is showing on the case. And then I know how I am going to stamp those two images so that they line up together. And it's nice to have these little cheat sheets. It's also nice if you make up a little cheat sheet to put it into the case. And that way you're going to have it and you won't have to hunt for it again. So this is the first one that I'm going to put down. And I'm just standing up and I am aligning that over my little stem. I'm just going to give that a nice little push. And then the second stamp, the one that I'm going to come back in with and give a little bit more definition, I'm actually going to stamp that off. The reason is I want to have two colors going, and some of that is going to overlap, and I don't want the overlap to have exactly the same shading. And you can see as I'm putting this down that it's going to give two kinds of shades of that flower. And again, I'm not going to get crazy that if I went a little bit too far out, trust me, when we get done with this, it won't even matter. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a couple more stamps. I'm going to use these two, which make a nice little bud. And the way these work, let's kind of do it the same way. I'm going to stamp the larger one and just stamp that down. And then I'm going to stamp the smaller one. And this is going to be to fill in the middle. But again, I just want to see how they look so I know how to orient them. So I am going to use my bigger stamp first. Bring that in. And I'll just get it close to the stem. Put that down. Then I'm going to grab my smaller piece. And just like I did before, I'm going to stamp that off. And then I'm going to put that in the middle and stamp that down. And then you get kind of a multi-layer look on your flower. There is also a stamp in this set, this one, that gives you the ability to put what would look like the center of a flower. And I'll show you what that looks like on this example. It kind of gives you that little piece in the middle. And I'm just going to do that kind of quickly on the one on the left. And then we're going to get into the fun part of this whole thing. So I am just eyeballing that and stamping that. So I have my flower all done, and I'll put those to the side just for a moment. When I got to this point, I decided that I wanted to add a little bit of interest and depth to the background. And I've been playing around with a scoring board recently and thought, Okay, let's see what it would look like if I take this piece and I do some scoring, and then I come back and I do some ink blending. So I am just putting this into, sorry, this is not a Stampin' Up! Scoring board, but it will work. I'm going to start on the right rather than on the left. It seems to be easier for me. And I am going to score every other quarter. So I'm going to start at 3 1/4, then 3, and just keep going down. And this is pretty quick. It's pretty mindless. It doesn't take a lot. And it's kind of interesting because the paper starts to curl as you're doing this, because you're breaking down the fibers and the paper is coming with it. And then when you get to that last quarter, you do have to do a little bit of paper gymnastics and kind of hold it and do your quarter. So now you've got this bowed piece. Turn it over. And what you're going to do is you're going to go through the middle of each of what you just did. You're still doing a 1/4 inch gap, but you're just going right in between everything that you just did. And this tends to flatten your paper out, and it gives you a really, really, I think, cool effect. And you've seen this before. And then when we get to that last one, paper gymnastics, and we have our embossing. But that's only the start of the embossing. And this is where I think some of the magic really comes through. Because what we're going to do is turn this piece into something that looks kind of like this piece. And this is where obviously you can choose to use many different colors. You can choose to use one color, and I'm going to use a few. I'm going to grab a couple of blending brushes, and I'm going to grab a couple of colors. And the colors that I'm using that pumpkin pie, and I'm also using Soft Succulent, because in the finished card, one of the cardstock colors is Soft Succulent. So I'm going to have 2 separate brushes, one for each color. This pumpkin pie is starting to look a little putrid. I don't know what goes on sometimes with the reds and the oranges as far as ink pads, but they get a little mungy at times. And this is another thing, you don't have to think. I am kind of blending some of that color off before I bring it onto the paper. Move your brush around in different directions, clockwise, counterclockwise. Don't worry if you get more ink in some places than you do in others. It really doesn't matter, because that's going to be half the beauty of what you're doing. And another thing, another little tip that I wanted to pass along is when I wash these brushes, and I had been washing them just with soap and water, sometimes the ink wasn't coming out completely. So I used to use this when I did stenciling, and this is an amazing product. It is available at Michael's, big box stores, probably on Amazon, and it is the best in terms of cleaning brushes. And it also will condition the bristles. So it's a sort of a 2-for-1. And it works really easily, and it works so well, you do not have to put much on at all. It lathers out quite a bit. And I used that for the first time. I don't know why I hadn't thought about it, but I brought that out when I was cleaning up from my example, and I was amazed at how well it cleans. So I just highly, highly recommend it. And a little goes a long way, so you don't have to use much at all. And you can see I'm using both colors. I brought in the Soft Succulent. I already used the pumpkin pie, and I'm just not even thinking, just kind of chit-chatting, adding some color. I can blend these in a little bit more. I can go back if I want to add in a little bit more of the pumpkin pie. And again, I really don't care if there's more color, darker color in one area than another. And I'm going to stop before I get too much. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tear. Now, when you tear, if you tear toward you, you get the fiber on the paper showing. If you tear away from you, you don't get that fiber showing. I want the fiber to show, because what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to put some color on the edges, on those torn edges. And if I want to be able to do that, I need to tear the paper toward me. And again, on here, I'm not really thinking much at all. And I'm not measuring how much I'm tearing. I'm just tearing. And you may be thinking, why did you stamp on the bottom if you're going to tear it? Well, I didn't know how far I was going to tear it. And it's okay. It's fine. No need to worry. So I'm just tearing that off. And it still gives the illusion that it's all the way down at the bottom. Then I'm just going to come in. And when you do this, be light-handed. Don't go over the top adding the color, because it can look a little intentional if you do that. And you want this to look like it just brushed in the ink. So you're just going to grab it and put it right on the edge. And then I'm going to turn that around. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. And obviously I could have used the Soft Succulent color if I wanted to, or I could have used the Mossy Meadow, you know, anything in my opinion, in the 3 colors that are part of this little focal point. And again, I'm not trying to make it uniform. There are some places where the pumpkin pie is going to be darker in color than others, and that's okay. It really, really doesn't matter. And there's the beginning of the focal point. So it started with a piece of white cardstock. We did some inking and stamping, and then a little bit of embossing with just a good old scoring board, and then came in and did some ink blending, tore the paper toward you, and that's what you end up with. And every time you are going to end up with something different, completely different. So now let's talk about how to finish this off and get a nice little design included. 3 colors. I've got the Mossy Meadow, I've got the Soft Succulent, I've got my focal point. So let's talk about those, and let's kind of figure out some really cool ways to add texture. First, let's talk about the size of these. I mentioned that the width on all of these is 3.5. So let's just stack these on top of each other. And each of these is 3.5. That's how they're going to kind of go together. Obviously, they're going to be different heights. Well, one thing you might see already is that Soft Succulent, it's not the length that's showing over here. Oh, but it will be. So don't worry about that. I'll show you the trick in a moment. And the Mossy Meadow is going to be the perfect size to fit on top of our Slimline card. And I'll bring that piece out as well. But what you will see on the Mossy Meadow and the Soft Succulent, there's texture. And that texture is added in a couple of different ways. And I'm going to show you how they were added a piece at a time. And I'm going to start with the Soft Succulent. There is a bundle that is in the new catalog, and it has an amazing embossing folder. This is called Bouquet of Love. And also with this bundle, are two other components. There's a really cool stamp set, and then there's a really cool set of dies. And we're going to use these, not today, but later. And what's amazing is this embossing folder allows you to put the die, this heart die, right in here. You put your paper in, you run this through your embossing machine, and two things happen. You get a beautifully embossed piece of paper and you get a die cut. But that's for another day. Today, we're going to use this embossing folder in kind of an interesting way. When I looked at this embossing folder and I thought, darn it, I love all the flowers and I want that to be part of this card, but it has this heart thing going on in the middle that breaks up the design. Well, all right. Well, I cut this piece of paper so it's exactly the height that will work in that embossing machine or in the folder. It's 6 inches. These are 6 inches. So this piece of paper is 3.5 by 6. And I thought, all right, well, if I have this piece that is going to go over the top, all I really need are the top and the bottom to be embossed. The middle, if it has a heart shape that's embossed in there, no one's going to see that because I'm going to put this piece of paper over the top. So what I did is I took that piece and through the magic of running it through before, this is what I end up with. So I have an embossed piece that definitely has a heart in the middle. Isn't that gorgeous? It's going to be so much fun to make Valentine cards with. And what I want to do on this one is I want to split it in half because I want to make it a little bit longer than that piece of just 6-inch piece of paper. Well, that's simple. Grab your trimmer. I know it's 6 inches long, so I'm going to chop it in half at 3 inches. And since it's 3.5 inches wide, this piece is going to cover the top. Well, what's kind of interesting too is when you use that embossing folder, because it's all the way to the edge, you get a part that isn't embossed. That was just perfect, because if I tear the edges off and I get down to where it is embossed, the design that I have on the focal point is carried over onto the embossed piece. And this one, just like the other one, I am tearing the paper toward me because I want to have some of that fiber to do a little bit of ink blending. And I'm just taking the ends off of that top and the bottom. You can do this with any embossing folder, obviously, and just have another layer of texture on a card. I think it's really fun and interesting and just a little different. Now, you may be one of the only people who will know that you've added a little bit of ink, you don't need a lot, onto this torn piece of embossed paper. And I'm using the same color ink as the color of the paper. It's just a tone on tone. It adds just a little bit of interest on the edge, and it doesn't honestly look a heck of a lot different after you get done, but heck, you'll know it will make you proud. And it does add just enough. It adds just a little bit of additional texture. All right, so we've got our second layer. We've got one more layer before we start putting everything together. And let's talk about that layer. It is a piece of Mossy Meadow, and it is 3.5 inches wide because we're keeping to that theme, and it is in length 8.5. So this is a perfect piece to cut from a regular 8.5 by 11 piece of paper. You're just going to stick it in on the 11-inch side and cut it at 3.5. Well, This one also has some texture on it, and it's using the soon to be outused embossing folder of mine, because I use it all the time, the Tasteful Textiles. So what's interesting is, let's look at this embossing folder. It is not long enough to accommodate this piece, but this is just one piece, and it's embossed on this side and it's embossed on this side. Obviously, what I did is I stuck the piece of paper in my embossing folder. I ran it through. I turned it around and I ran it through. The reason I don't care where that middle piece is double embossed is it is going to be hidden by these other layers. So no one will ever know. And that's exactly what I did with this piece. So I ran it through, stuck this end in, stuck this end in, and now I have a fully embossed piece. And now we're at the point where we can start to assemble. The first thing that I am going to do is I'm just going to get a couple of these pieces out of the way. I'm going to grab some green glue because I do want to have the ability to move things around just a tad. And I'm also going to make sure that I can open the card the way I want to. And I want to open it on the right. So I'm going to orient everything that way. Because this has texture on it, you do want to make sure that in the corners, you put a little glob rather than just a little dab, because those corners are really going to be the anchor points for the piece. And I am simply going to bring this in and square it up as best as I can. And it's really good that glue gives me a little bit of forgiveness to move it where I want. And then I'm just gonna give that a nice burnish. Then I'm going to orient the card this way, because the next layers that I want to put on are my little soft succulent ones. And it really doesn't matter that you get everything perfectly straight. Probably the tear on either side is not going to match anyway. So it's almost impossible to get these exactly in the middle. But I find, for me, when I'm putting things that need to be about the same distance from the edge, if I orient it this way, it's easier for me to see. And that might just be me. And I'm just going to bring that in, and I can kind of cheat because I'm lining the green on either side up and putting that down. And then I'm going to do the same thing over on this side. And again, it really doesn't matter if they're exactly the same. It's more important that the green is covering up the green. And I'm just eyeballing on the left and the right. And that looks close enough. That's good enough. And I'll just put that down. And you can see that when I bring this piece back in, we've still got plenty of room to make sure that everything is hidden. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of ribbon. And the ribbon is going to get attached using a very technical Scotch tape. This ribbon is absolutely gorgeous. It is super soft and it really works well to do bows. I'm not going to overthink where I'm going to put this. So I'm just going to wrap a little bit around the side, put some tape to hold that ribbon down, and then bring it around the other side. I like to use this kind of technique so I don't overuse ribbon, And it also gives me a little bit of a better play to get things lined up. So I can still move that around just a tad. And then I'm going to cut off the excess back here. When you put this piece down, I do suggest that you're mindful to get some glue on the tape, and that way you're going to be assured that you are going to hold that ribbon down. And you can also put a piece of tape between each of the ends just to make sure that it stays. And I'm just going to put some glue right around that tape, run it down the side, and run it on that tape, and then put that right in the middle. And again, I tend to orient it this way when I'm trying to get things sort of kind of in the middle. I'm just going to eyeball that on the bottom. Yeah, that's fine. It's all good. And then I will bring it to the right orientation, get that ribbon aligned a little bit. And then I'm going to make sure that I'm really pressing where I put that Scotch tape, because I really want that glue to adhere. And make sure I get that lined up right on the side. There we go. So there's a lot of depth in this card. There's an awful lot of just textures and colors, but it's not, in my opinion, overwhelming. And it can be used for so many different occasions. So let's talk about finishing this off. And I'm going to bring back in the example. And they're not the same. This has a lot more on the soft succulent. I did not do that intentionally, but you can see that even by doing that, it's just a different look. There's a lot more of this embossing folder with a lot of different textures. So even by doing that very subtle change, there's a very different look to the card. I also didn't put as much ink on the blending on this as I did on this, but that's okay. And that's, I think, a lot of the fun of it. Each time you do this, you're going to come up with something a little different. I decided that I wanted to use a different sentiment as well on this card. On the other one, I used the Just Thinking of You Today. Well, I want to make sure I have some birthdays in the stash. So I chose to use the No One Deserves a Happier Birthday Than You as my sentiment. I stamped that with Mossy Meadow. Just wanted to bring that Mossy Meadow in a little bit more. And then I cut that out with one of the dies from the Tasteful Labels dies. This set has some really nice dies in it, and I use this one. And it's just a really nice kind of shape. I wanted a shape that wasn't super defined, wasn't really a square or a circle, because this card doesn't have a lot of square or circle on it. It's definitely a little bit more organic, if we want to use that word. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to attach that sentiment. And I am going to attach it using some dimensionals. And when I attach it, I've done this before, I'm going to kind of line that up right by the ribbon. The ribbon is thin enough that I can put some dimensionals on it and it will stay, but I want to make sure that I've got some anchor dimensionals that will kind of go above and below the ribbon when I turn this over, and make sure that everything attaches okay. And I can tell I was successful today because I have ink all over me. Definitely something that happens when I do ink blending. And part of the design that I ended up with in the example changed because I had ink all over my hands and I got ink all over the design. So we had to make a change, but that's half the fun. if you can figure out how to cover up your oopses or just use them to your advantage, then that's what I call successful. And when I put this sentiment on, I am going to put it intentionally a little bit off center because I will be adding a little bow. So I have an option of the left or the right, and I think I like it on the right because it doesn't cover up as much of that flower on the left. So I'm just going to, I'm standing up here, just going to attach that. And this is one sentiment that's pretty easy to get straight because I was just looking at the edge on the right and trying to get it straight with the edge of my card. Before we got together today, I tied a ribbon using a bow maker and I used the ribbon that I use behind here. This is the window pane checked ribbon. It's in an evening evergreen color. And you can see how well that ribbon or the bow came out. It's just really forgiving in terms of putting a bow together. And I don't know if you guys have used this as glue, but the shimmery crystal effects is phenomenal as glue. And what I do is I just put a dollop, a little bit here where I'm going to be putting my bow. It's very thick. And then I'm just going to put my bow down where I want that to be. And it does take a few seconds to set, but that bow is going nowhere. It is just going to be very stuck. I use the same thing on this bow, it's going nowhere, and on this bow, and it's going nowhere. And I'm not going to pick that card out for a few seconds just to make sure that everything has set appropriately. But I am going to add a couple of these really pretty butterflies. And this is where embellishments can be super helpful, because where I made that little oops and I put the ink right there, that is the perfect place for a butterfly. And no one will ever see that little oops. And I just need to figure out which direction I want it to go. I think I want it to go that way. Oh my goodness, no more oops. And I'll use just a couple more. These have adhesive backing and they are super, super easy to use. Put one up here, and then I'm going to use a smaller one. And what I like to do is if there are different colors, you know, we've got the different papers, I like to put something on the different colors that grabs the attention of the person who's looking at the card. That's why I put that little one and this one, the bigger one, purposely on that Mossy Meadow, just to bring that out a little bit. And these are the brushed brass butterflies. So that is a replication, a little bit different, but of the Slimline card. And then I'm going to give you a little teaser because I'm going to do another video probably midweek on the tulip dies. And I just wanted to show you a couple of things that the tulip dies can do. And then I will put a video together and show you how these work to make flowers. But these are some of the pieces that can be cut out to make the tulips, the 3D tulips. And the set that we have actually has 17 different dies. And many of them are used to cut out some of the stamps. But then all of the ones that you see over here, these three, these two, and these two, cut out these shapes. And again, this is a teaser because I will be doing this more a little bit later in the week, but these dies are so interesting. If you look at, for example, this is the die that cut out this shape. But when I cut it out, it started out by looking like this, the one on the right. The way I got the piece of paper to look like this, so that when I fold it and I make the flower and it looks more like a flower, is I kept the die on top of the cutout piece. So I actually just kind of kept it like this. And then these openings are like a stencil. So I took a blending brush. I put my blending brush into Highland Heather ink, and I went in and I blended that Highland Heather ink onto the die cut. And I used this die cut for a stencil. And then this is what I'm left with. So when I fold these and I have my flower, and I can make it 3D, and I can make it so both sides can be used. And I can do that with all the other pieces that are in that set. And this can go in the middle. So yep, this is a teaser. And then this can go even in the middle here. I can use a bone folder and make this very three-dimensional, which I'm going to do, but not right now. And then I can add those pieces to stems that I've cut out with the dies, add leaves to those. And the leaves are the same stamps that I used on the project. So I'm going to just leave those there, and later in the week, I'm just going to do a quick video to show you how to use some of the dies to make really pretty tulips. And the ones that I made here are very rudimentary. The ones that I will be making, I didn't do any shading on these. The ones that I will be making are going to be a lot more three-dimensional and realistic. But I think you're going to enjoy that, and I will let you know when I have done that. So I'm going to put these back in here, and I just want to bring out the cards that we started with, and also the one that we did today, and kind of put them out so you can see them. And I think and hope that you agree that these stamps, which are the Flowering Tulips, and the dies that you will become much, much more familiar with soon, have a tremendous amount of possibilities between the flowers, the sentiments, the 3D options, just a lot of things going on. And then if you add in some of the brushed brass butterflies or the ribbon, you can just really heighten the beauty in these particular products. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you try it. This should open up a lot of possibilities if you want to put multiple textures into a card. Really, really fun and actually pretty quick. And I would love to see what you make. Thank you much. See you soon.